Good morning. I'm Bob Cusack, the editor-in-chief of The Hill. I want to thank you all for coming to the museum. I also want to thank Pharma, our sponsor. We are live streaming at thehill.com. Now it's time for our sponsor perspective. I want to introduce John Castellani. He is the president and CEO of Pharma and a former leader on the Business Roundtable. Please welcome John Castellani.
Pharmaceutical companies have nearly doubled their R&D investment in personalized medicine over the past 5 years and expect to increase that investment by an additional 1/3 in the next 5 years. Our researchers in our industry forecast a 69% increase in the number of personalized medicines in development over the next 5 years. And most importantly, what we've seen is the fruits of that labor in recent approvals. In 2014, according to PMC, 20% of all the medicines that were approved for patients were personalized, treating diseases like ovarian cancer, lung cancer, Gaucher disease, among others. These treatments and others in the pipeline promise to improve patient lives in the healthcare system by getting the right medicine to the right patient more quickly. It's a path in personalized medicine to a more efficient healthcare system. And by targeting medicines to patients who will benefit most and not prescribing the wrong medicines to patients who will not benefit, personalized medicine will help maximize the value of those medicines to the patients and to the entire healthcare system. Our colleagues across the whole biomedical research ecosystem are committed to continuing this development. And we commend the administration's commitment in this area and look forward to hearing more about it and their efforts later today. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank the lawmakers in both the House and the Senate for the bipartisan work and the work that they've been doing with patient groups, with disease experts, and with others to speed the discovery and the development and the delivery of new medicines for patients. We still have a lot of work to do. There are still a lot of headwinds. The science remains challenging, but the science is only part of the battle. We must ensure that a clear and transparent regulatory systems keeps pace with that science. And we need to ensure that payment policies are patient-centered and aligned with personalized medicine. There's so much promise here, and we think, and I hope you agree, that with the right policies, we can continue the encouraging trajectory that we are on. But, as I said when we started, we don't know everything. And we look forward today to finding out what the expert thinks. So thank you for coming, and I look forward to the discussions.
Thanks, John. I want to introduce our next panel. Kathy Hudson is the Deputy Director for Science, Outreach, and Policy at NIH, and Elizabeth Mansfield is the Director of Personalized Medicine in the Office of In Vitro Diagnostics, Device Evaluation and Safety, Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA. If they can come up, and please welcome them. Hi, how are you?
Good morning.
Thanks for doing this morning. Let me first throw it out to either one of you to describe, because I know you have different agency perspectives. But the President announced the Precision Medicine Initiative in his State of the Union earlier this year, and we've done stories of how people try to get their stuff in the State of the Union. But the President recognized this as such an important issue that not only did he talk about it in the State of the Union, but he announced a major initiative. What is, from the NIH, and Kathy, we'll start with you, and FDA perspective, what is this initiative?
What is the Precision Medicine Initiative? So there is a lot of work that goes into getting things into the State of the Union, and we actually didn't know whether or not he would mention the Precision Medicine Initiative in the State of the Union. So we all gathered at my boss's house, Dr. Cullen's house, with the appropriate libations, and when he actually said, and tonight I'm launching the we all burst into elated whoops and hollers. And had to go back and actually watch it. So the Precision Medicine Initiative is really a part of a much bigger area of research. And so all of the institutes and centers at NIH and in pharma and bio are investing in trying to understand the individual targeted causes of disease in order to develop targeted interventions, preventions, and therapies. The Precision Medicine Initiative that we are really working hard on crafting now is a big effort to develop a very rich and unprecedented data set in order to facilitate precision medicine research. I could say more about that as we move along this morning.
Sure. You want to add anything?
Yes, from the FDA's point of view, we did not gather to watch the State of the Union address, but we're nonetheless gratified that the president
We have more
mentioned
fun
it
at
there.
NIH.
Yeah. We feel that this is sort of a directive to us, and we had already started down this road that, as we move forward in precision medicine, we'll be using really new and powerful tools that can sequence genomes and do lots of new things, and that FDA really has to be nimble here and to work out a way that allows the technologies that are going to back this up to evolve as rapidly as they can, and yet still be safe and effective so that patients can rely on them, so that studies like what NIH is doing are actually getting results that they can work with and that are true. So we're taking this as our directive to move forward with our great plans for a more modern regulatory structure around, we're starting off with next generation sequencing.
So Kathy, you mentioned that you didn't know it was going to be in there, and then it's in there. And then 10 days later, there's a White House press conference, and that just starts the process. How were those 10 days, but more importantly, what has happened since then, and how much of a frenzy was it?
So we had been working with the president in the White House in advance of the State of the Union because he was interested in developing an important initiative in this area. And so we had been putting forward various ideas and having conversations with him and his staff. His interest in this area really goes back a very long way. And some of you will remember when he was in the Senate, he introduced a bill about personalized medicine. And the genesis of that was he read an article in the New York Times about a targeted therapy. He walked into his office and laid the newspaper article on his staff's desk, Dora Hughes at the time, and said, we need to put together a piece of legislation that can move this forward. So that's always been in his DNA. And so we had put forward some plans before the State of the Union and before the event 10 days later. That was really a great event. So we have a bunch of people who offer to provide their information and a biological specimen so we can get their DNA. And then we can do an analysis of, for example, variants where we already know they influence drug response. So there are some 140 some odd drugs that have genetic testing in their label in some way or another. So imagine that we could do testing for all of those variants and more, and know what people's drugs and prescriptions are, and be able to do sort of a big validation of those variants and their interactions with drugs, but also informing people so that they know when they go to their doctor's office what drugs will and will not work for them, and be able to identify new variants that interact with drugs in specific ways. So I can imagine that that's something where we could have real tangible benefit to participants and benefit to the research community in the very short term. I'll stop babbling on by just saying that about a week or so ago, we got together with a bunch of folks, leaders from biotech and pharma, to have a conversation about the research cohort. FDA was there as well. And one of the things that they were particularly excited about was using the cohort data as an additional mechanism of post-market surveillance collection. And so that was an interesting opportunity as well that I think we'll see that kind of result in the very near term.
Liz, what about, we're talking about so much stuff, the commitment of this initiative to privacy. That's a big issue right now. What is the federal government doing in this area to make sure that there are privacy protections, and will it be a regulatory approach?
It's not purely a regulatory approach, but I'm going to kick that back to Kathy because NIH has done a lot of work on this, on the privacy issue and how that will be handled here.
So, there's no perfect guarantee of privacy. And I think, particularly in the wake of recent events with the Office of Personnel Management and others, we recognize that our data is vulnerable. What's interesting and a challenge and something that we're working with lawmakers on is how can we afford the best possible privacy protections using technology. And also, there's this very strange incentive right now to the extent that we have our medical information is really important to us, but it's not all that interesting to other people. So aggregate medical information from a bunch of people is not, for research, it's very valuable,
Right.
and we'll make it accessible, but it's not really all that valuable for a hacker. The thing that makes it valuable is that it is almost uniformly identified by a social security number, and a social security number then connects you to all sorts of other information. So if we can figure out ways of having unique research identifiers, for example, that don't link individuals' private information to important, valuable financial information, I think we'll be able to go a long way in terms of protecting privacy. But we're working really hard on that, and also working with the lawmakers to make sure that we have the right kinds of penalties to put forward if people get information from the cohort and use it in ways that were not intended by the participants.
This question really for both of you. What kind of input have you received that maybe surprised you from stakeholders, or something that you've implemented that maybe you didn't foresee in the reaching out to stakeholders that you maybe changed the initiative?
Some of the input that we've received, particularly around Precision FDA and around the white paper that we released, and by the way, we've just released 3 new white papers because we're going to have 2 more workshops in November around what we're doing, is that people are really, generally FDA is viewed as the big wall between, you and getting your stuff out. And that people are really excited about this. They want to be part of it. And that when we give them the opportunity to participate, I guess I'm not surprised, but I'm gratified that they're jumping in and saying, yes, I'd love to help you. And so that's been really great because there are so many people out there with so much data, so many tools, so much knowledge that, we can't even begin to replicate within the walls of FDA. That would be impossible. So we've been really pleased that people have been so excited about working with us.
Yeah, it's usually when we put forward scientific initiatives, you can count on somebody having an argument about it. You should be investing in my area, that's not as important as mine.
Sure.
And it has been surprising how uniformly people are excited about and supporting this initiative. And I think whether it's from basic science to applied or high-tech stuff, private sector, academia, people are pretty uniformly pleased. The thing that I was surprised and pleased about was we had the opportunity this spring and summer to do a survey of people's attitudes and put forward the idea of a cohort and asking, so do you think this is a good idea? And would you want to participate? And what would be the important aspects of your participation? And uniformly, we found really strong support for building the cohort. A majority from all racial and ethnic groups said that they would want to participate. So that was really interesting. There was really no difference across racial and ethnic groups. And that the most important thing to people was getting information back about themselves. So this notion of really being partners and participants in the enterprise and not just the donors of data. They want to be donors of the data, but they also want to get stuff back about themselves. And that was an interesting and sort of inspiring data point.
Now, the goal is to get 1 million people in the cohort, right?
Yep.
How...
You want to sign up?
It sounds interesting. But how do you... cohort is kind of a Washington word, but you basically need people to join.
Is, yeah.
What is the extent? You said that people are writing letters and they said they want to join.
Yeah.
How do you reach them? What's the ad campaign like?
Yeah.
They're not reading the Federal Register, right?
You don't read the Federal Register?
Not anymore.
That's right. So we are trying to figure that out. Correct.
Okay.
We're going to have sort of two doorways to get into the cohort. One doorway is going to be anybody anywhere being able to raise their hand and say, I want in, and I can talk a little bit more about that. And the other is going to be by partnering with healthcare provider organizations that have large numbers of patients who trust them and who receive care from those organizations over many, many years. So think Geisinger or Kaiser or Intermountain or Marshfield. Those organizations have big patient populations, and we can partner with them. We can ask them to come in and tell us how they will partner with us, provide some resources to them to do that. And then I think we'll have a pretty sort of expected ability to recruit participants within those health systems.
Okay.
And so we're going to put out requests for applications in the next several weeks to ask healthcare systems to apply. More challenging and more exciting is this notion of how do you have an ad campaign that can tell everybody in the country, this is what we're doing, come be a part of it. And then have the ability for people to sign up and provide information about themselves, provide a biological specimen, and get a baseline health exam. So that's a really interesting challenge. And if people have ideas about how to do this, please let me know. I mean, you know, my mom is sort of my use case. So she is pretty significantly crippled. She sent me an email during the State of the Union on her iPad with her stylus saying, I want to volunteer, right? She lives in an independent living facility in St. Paul. And her health care is from a gazillion different providers. So how do we set up a system to get her in the door? And so we're being pretty creative. This is a very not your father's NIH model of recruiting people into research.
As far as that recruitment, what is your timing goal?
So we have, the president proposed money for FY6. He asked for money for FY16. You know, there's a little chaos going on the Hill right now.
Just a little bit. Yep.
But both House and Senate Appropriations Committees put forward $130 million for this in the president's in their appropriations bills. So hopefully, when we get an appropriation, that money will be there. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and ask people to give us their very best ideas of how they can help us build this. So we're going to get those announcements out pretty quickly. We're going to be using an authority we have for being able to get money out the door that we've never used before, called Other Transactions Authority. And it's a very exciting mechanism where we can basically create new ways of partnering with organizations to get this done.
Really?
So we're doing something really novel, and we're doing it in a novel way. So that's fun.
That's never been done before.
It's never been done before, by our agency.
Okay.
So other agencies like DARPA have used this Other Transactions Authority before. We only have it for a limited amount of money, and we're going to use it for this, and it's going to be a pretty exciting way to really innovate about how we do our business, our core business of supporting science. So that's pretty exciting. I'm hoping we have people starting to enroll early enough in calendar year 16.
Calendar year 16. Okay.
Yep.
Liz, as far as the outreach, and Kathy too, the outreach to Capitol Hill, you mentioned lawmakers are involved, and this is a bipartisan initiative. But can you describe which committees are you talking to? Is it different groups, whether it's health disparities? What kind of groups on Capitol Hill are you talking to, / committees?
We have not been directly talking to committees about this because it's a regulatory activity that I think we would do anyway because we recognize the need for this. Fortunately, the president, was right with us on that. So we have not had to ask for really anything moving forward. Most of our needs are small financial needs to do things like put in place contracts for our web-based, platform and so on. And we have put some money into our Centers for Excellence in Regulatory Science, who are helping us. But we've been in the position of not needing to do a lot of discussion on the Hill.
How about NIH?
I'm going to the Hill as soon as we finish here.
Is that right? So you update them pretty regularly?
Yeah, and it's so both in the House and the Senate and the Appropriations Committee,
Right.
and our authorizing committees, Health and Energy and Commerce, are really interested in this. And both, because the innovation and cures bills are moving through those
Right.
authorizing committees, they're really interested in what do you need from us to make this work? And, we did one of our workshops this summer in Nashville. Lamar Alexander was there, and he's very eager to have us, to work together with us about what are the policies that we can only solve or only advance through statute. And so it's been great. I mean, they've been very actively interested in interacting with us. We just had an appropriations hearing in the Senate about a week ago, and uniformly this was really, really well received, although asking serious questions about, the trajectory and accountability and oversight and the like.
I only have a couple of minutes left, so kind of want to do kind of closing statements. Anything that I haven't asked, Liz, that you would say, or input, or anything you want to say about the initiative that I haven't asked about?
One of the things that I'd like to mention is that as part of the cohort and what the cohort wants to do, there are a number of devices, sort of medical products, that are not part of our particular next generation sequencing, but the mobile technology, especially, and other tools that I think the cohort will be leveraging heavily in order to get information about people, to have a back and forth. And so we're very interested in that part as well, is how people are going to use these, how they play into generating information. Right now, most of our personalized medicine is in the oncology area, but we'd really like to see it in many other areas of health, cardiovascular disease, obesity, other kinds of big public health issues, where we think that the cohort and the types of products that we regulate are going to make a huge difference in the future of how those big public health issues are going to be resolved, or at least become less of an issue.
I think I think we're at a really exciting moment with building this precision medicine cohort and being able to work with our sister agencies and with the private sector and researchers, and most importantly, working with the people who are going to participate in the cohort and really want to build a strong foundation of interaction and engagement and trust as we get this underway. And so thanks very much for having us.
Thank you. Kathy, Liz, please thank our panel. Really enjoyed the conversation. I also want to, our next panel is going to be moderated by Sarah Ferris. She's covers healthcare for us at The Hill. Please welcome Sarah Ferris.
We'll be talking about data-driven medicine, starting with Dr. Stephen Averbuch. He is the Vice President of Development for Oncology and Pharmacodiagnostics at Bristol Myers Squibb. We have Alan Bosch, who is at the Patient Advocate Foundation and the National Patient Advocate Foundation. We have Amy Miller, who is the Executive Vice President of the Personalized Medicine Coalition.
Getting mic'd.
All right.
Supposed to give her a big applause. Yeah.
All right. So we will. So as we're talking about this conversation, as we get started, I wanted to just talk about the differences here between personalized and precision medicine. We hear these terms a lot, and as we've been hearing today, described as the next frontier in healthcare. So we're hearing about this very exciting moment. So let's just talk a little bit about the language that we're using here, why it's important, and how we can think of this to frame the conversation.
Sure. So I'm happy to kick it off. So we think that from a patient perspective, patients have always, and the physicians that treat them and the care teams have always tried to practice personalized medicine in a lot of cases. So this is not a new concept, to be sure. I think that the way we look at it is there's actually a new paradigm that should evolve over time with the advancement of precision medicine, that actually be this three-legged stool of precision medicine, which is the actual more precise treatment mechanism based on unique characteristics of the individual patient. You have precision information, which is things that can be provided through diagnostic testing, genetic testing. It actually helps provide the customization, identify the appropriate precision medicine to apply, and this idea of precision reimbursement. And we'll talk about all these things, I'm sure, but all those things have to come together to create what we call a personalized healthcare paradigm. It's not a new concept, but those three components have to come together in a new and different ways and able to really achieve the benefits that precision medicine can bring to the patients.
The Personalized Medicine Coalition a few years ago recognized many different terms were being used for this thing. And we had a group of people talk about the differences between personalized medicine, precision medicine, individualized medicine, targeted therapeutics, and a few other terms. And we found that personalized and individualized were the preferred terms by patients because it keeps the person in the concept. But in fairness, the two, personalized and precision, are used interchangeably.
So I think not only speaking from an industry perspective, but as a physician and as a medical oncologist who works in the pharmaceutical industry, when I speak to a lot of my physician colleagues, sometimes it is semantics, and I think sometimes it can be used very interchangeably. Physicians always think of themselves as having practiced personalized medicine from the time they entered medical school, treating patients as individuals in the one-to-one interaction in the doctor's office. I think precision medicine is probably, when you think of it comprehensively, especially when discussing policy and engendering all the aspects that go into the future of how medicine is going to be practiced in a precision context, advancing the science, incorporating that new science into approaching medical practice in a more precise way. To me, precision medicine is probably a more apt term and more descriptive.
Sure. And as you are deep in the development of all of this, can you talk about some of the breakthroughs that you've seen that you think have brought us to this point? What are some of the significant points that you've seen?
Well, I think I'll cite two. I mean, clearly, and I think everyone recognizes that the advent of molecular biology and specifically the elucidation of the human genome and giving us the tools to understand the genomic components that result in being able to identify specific aberrations in patients as a result of genomic alterations, mutations, et cetera, for specific diseases. That clearly has been the biggest breakthrough in terms of enabling the whole concept of precision medicine. I think more recently we also have to look at new therapeutic modalities such as immunotherapy for cancer, which is not only understanding the molecular basis of the immune system and how we can harness that to help advance cancer treatments for improved survival, but understanding the interface between the tumor and the host immune system and the biology behind that is really enabling us to help identify which patients will benefit from which therapies in a precision medicine paradigm.
Sure. And Amy Allen, how does that translate into your advocacy work, and how do you break that down for patients and for people who aren't as familiar and aren't in the laboratories themselves?
So the first personalized medicines hit the market 2 decades, 15 years ago. And then we had 1 or 2 every few years. And just recently, in 2014, 20% of FDA's new drug approvals, brand new drugs to the market, were personalized medicines. So we've hit a very interesting juncture. And now it's a sizable minority of new products coming to the market. This means all of the different avenues in healthcare need to align with this new paradigm. It's not just a one-off. It's how we treat whole diseases. It's changed first how we treated breast cancer. It's now changed how we treat non-small cell lung cancer. It's drastically changed how we treat cystic fibrosis, for example, and those are just 3.
I would add from the patient perspective, I think it's a bit of a perfect storm in some ways, very good in some ways, challenging. Patients have always wanted to be treated as an individual and have have a say in the process and have a robust shared decision-making engagement with their care team. So you've got some movement out in the reimbursement environment around shifting higher and higher costs to the patient themselves as a payer, And then you also have consumer-driven healthcare and value-based purchasing. So this paradigm of personalized healthcare fits very well into that model of having a very engaged patient, with the ability to understand and access more information about their treatment options, have an array of treatment options that can be customized to them, and really engage in that shared decision-making process in new and powerful ways that has never been been possible before. So I think that's what's exciting for patients, because ultimately they want those options and they want to know they're getting the best care and the most personalized care to them. But there are some challenges I'm sure we're going to talk about that as well.
That's exactly what we were going to get into. So we've heard the commitment from the Obama administration. We know that there is legislation moving forward in Congress on this. What are the biggest challenges facing each side of this, and what can be done from a government level, from an industry level, from a provider level to address these?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is looking at the efficiencies and the bureaucracy that creates barriers, and ensuring that we're modernizing all the rules, regulations, guidances, approaches to advancing the science and being able to successfully implement that science into a more personalized healthcare environment. So having the flexibility, working with FDA, for example, from an industry perspective, to identify, and I think Liz talked about in the previous panel, understanding and then being able to incorporate the new technology, the genomic platforms into the personalized medicine investigational approaches, and having the flexibility on a more of a fit-for-purpose approach, and ensuring that all the rules of engagement are really appropriately modernized and fit for purpose.
I think after a product is out of FDA, we see a very interesting conflict between the sister agencies of FDA, and that's the organization responsible for getting new products to market, making sure they're safe and effective, and CMS, which is a leading paying organization that determines if a product should be covered and then paid for. And although it covers mostly seniors, it does influence the rest of the payment programs. So we're seeing a very interesting conundrum where personalized medicines are lauded by the community, by patients, by industry, and rightly by the FDA, and yet then there's a breaking point when it gets to CMS, when coverage and payment for the necessary diagnostics doesn't necessarily keep pace with the enthusiasm we see on the therapeutic side. And I think that's an interesting conundrum that is probably a result of the relative newness and also the wave of these new technologies.
And we kind of divide the world up into the sort of the pre-approval and the post-approval side. So on the pre-approval side, you have a system that's really designed for a different paradigm of drug development. If you think of precision medicine as very much, or stratified medicine as a way to try to target subpopulations of subpopulations with really precise therapies, the clinical trial paradigm was not built for that. So there's some great things happening right now to try to rethink that and come up with new trial designs to really accommodate this approach to drug discovery and treatment discovery. More could certainly be done, but there is that sort of rethinking process that's happening now, and lots of good examples of that. I think then you think about the post-approval side. I think there's a lot of energy right now going into thinking about how do we change, to different payment models away from fee-for-service to alternative payment models. But this idea of trying to marry those new payment models and systems of delivery against precision medicine, that conversation is not happening at the same level as it is on the clinical side. So I think that's going to be one of the challenges. In fact, if you think about the reimbursement side and the access side of the equation, you've got a lot of efforts toward more standardization of care, which in some ways, if you think about it, is the opposite, right, of precision medicine. So precision medicine is really trying to individualize care and customize care, yet one of the main ways to really organize a reimbursement platform and system is around standardized care around large populations. You can see there's a tension there between those two concepts. I think it's a tension that they're not mutually exclusive. We can talk about how to reconcile them, but that's part of the challenge that I think is we're looking and coming up with ways to overcome some of the barriers on the clinical discovery side. I think the challenges really in the future are going to be very much around how do we engineer a reimbursement system that can actually not only accommodate, but actually encourage the utilization of precision medicine.
We've talked a lot about the relative newness of this, as you said, Amy. Do you all think that the transition to really incorporating this into the current healthcare system, is this going to be a natural process? Is this going to be something that we see massive advancements in the next few years? Is this going to be a decades-long conversation about, as we all said, the conflicts between how things are now and some of the more complicated, more difficult to understand pieces if you're used to the current system?
Yeah, I don't think it'll be decades long at all. I think the rapidity of the scientific advances and how we've seen the incorporation of targeted medicine into developing new innovative medicines that are designed for a specific population defined by their molecular characteristics, I think has happened increasingly, almost on an exponential pace over the last several years. And I expect that to continue, not only with the genomic technology advances, but the informatic advances that are critically important to this effort as well. I also think that it's uncovered a whole new layer of complexity, as you've alluded to, and that complexity can only be addressed and solved not by any one sector alone. I think we're going to have to put increased reliance on collaborative efforts, on private partner relationships to really solve the most pressing questions, to break through and continue to advance into implementation of the precision medicine promise into practice.
I think the wave is new. Personalized medicines aren't, and personalized approaches to care aren't. But we've seen this sizable shift, not only in new therapeutics, but also in how already marketed ones are used. We've also seen an increase in innovative diagnostics used in novel ways. And now there are so many examples that the rest of the systems must change. And in fairness to those who design coverage and payment systems, they're puzzling over this with us and curious about how to make it work. So for example, various alternative payment models have been structured for certain areas of care. And there's variation, but many of those who design alternative payment models are very curious about how they best suit patients, how they best suit systems, and how they best suit treating physicians. And I think we need to recognize that. Everyone recognizes we're learning right now and we're altering a system that's been in place for decades.
And as we talk about the changes that need to be done to the delivery system, to the regulations of this, what needs to be done in collecting the data and using the data that is so crucial to making this go forward? I know, Alan, we've talked about this before. What changes, how do people need to rethink the way that they look at this?
Yeah, so I think if you're going to, part of what you have to change, if you're rethinking the clinical trial and the clinical discovery process and trying to accommodate that to smaller populations and get those therapies approved more quickly, you're going to have to sacrifice some data on that end. So now you're going to have to rethink, well, how do we collect more data in the post-market world? And how do we do that within these subpopulations that are very small and get robust data? So I don't have the answer yet, but I think we're going to have, and there's a lot of people trying to think about how to solve that problem. And I know you have some comments probably about this as well. But that's the part, you're going to have to engineer more of an adaptive learning environment on the post-approval side. If you see some early indications of positive response or better quality of life indicators from a molecule or a treatment that's really designed for a subpopulation, if you can get that out of that population quickly, then you can set up systems to capture, sort of what we do in surveillance on the safety side, setting up better systems to collect other data in the post-approval environment that can be fed into, larger data sets to try to look and see what's actually happening. And can this molecule actually be used in other subpopulations based on a genetic marker? Because that's really where the scalability of this is. If you're just able to use it in one subpopulation, there's probably from a market perspective not going to be much incentive to develop those, because you're talking about treatments that are going to be for 2,000, 3,000 patients a year, even smaller. So the key is to find those treatments that actually work, and you can maybe give some examples of these where we're finding, because they're genetically driven or they're based on some sort of genetic profile that's not site-specific, from a cancer perspective, it can actually be applied in a different subpopulation of cancer. So that's where you start to take one treatment that it can actually be applied in across different subpopulations, and then you get to larger economies of scale, and that changes the, I guess, the market profile and opportunity for development of something like this. But if that doesn't happen, if you can't create that adaptive learning environment to see, does this work in other subpopulations, that I don't know that the market structure is going to be conducive to encourage manufacturers to actually look at these in the long term.
Yeah, I think you described it very nicely. The concept of adaptive learning or rapid learning systems, I think, definitely applies here. And it goes back to the informatics. So you talked a little bit about the upstream aspect of the data. I also like to think about the downstream. How are we actually going to adjudicate and then disseminate and apply the information into a medical practice? So if there's new information coming, that's coming very fast, it's genomically based, making sure that it meets regulatory standards for safety and efficacy, and being able to then provide appropriately disseminated information. You know, from the farmer perspective, we don't just produce medicines, we produce information about the medicines and how to best use them. And I think this is one package that, as we gain more and more data and information about precision medicine and its complexity, it's going to be incumbent upon all of us to put that into an educational and informational delivery to the larger community, not just physicians, patients, and payers as well. And it's really bringing all of that together in a cohesive, understandable way that's going to make it all happen.
Right. And so this type of collection of data that would be most useful in advancing this type of medicine, how major of a shift is that from what is currently done? And do we need to change the mindset here? Is there, how natural of a change would this be?
I think that there's two different shifts that are going on. One is in major medical centers that see themselves as practicing personalized medicine. And very often, some of the things the other panelists have talked about are already happening. So when someone's getting care, they may receive diagnostic testing that helps determine if they're going to be treated in the clinic or enter into a clinical trial. Or maybe they are in the clinic not doing well and again enter into the clinical trial. Or maybe they're in the clinic, fail in first, second, and third line, and then the physician uses a novel diagnostic to target care in a novel way. And maybe the patient has a positive result, maybe not, but we're losing that information. And so there does need to be a transitional shift. And so I know we've just had a whole panel on the Precision Medicine Initiative, but I'd like to highlight a couple of the parts of that related to your question. One is in the National Cancer Institute. They're looking at some of these questions as part of the PMI. They're looking at novel uses of therapeutics, capturing that data systemically and making it part of this learning healthcare system. And then the other part of PMI that I think captures the data question is transformative, which is using all of that data, putting it into one repository, an electronic medical record that is very flexible and also owned by the individual patient participant, and then can be brought to physicians of choice or into a clinical trial, or both at different times of one's life. And I think those are very exciting changes, and whether or not these massive systemic changes could happen without the PMI remains to be seen. Hope we don't have to, because I think this will force it a little faster.
Right. So do you think, how much would this be changing the nature of clinical trials? And how do you have conversations with people who are very much committed to the way they are done now and don't see a path forward with what is a very new approach?
Well, Amy spoke to it. I think we are already seeing implementation of novel clinical trial designs. So these have been referred to, at least in the oncology community. There's the lung map trial. There's the I-SPY 2 trial for breast cancer. Lung map is for non-small cell lung cancer. There's other companies have introduced first-in-human studies that are sufficiently adaptive and modular that can lead to sufficient safety and efficacy data that enables FDA approval. So we're already seeing this happen over the last several years. And I think it is changing our mindset. We're not going to be able to do the large randomized phase 3 controlled trial in every situation, especially as we get more and more precise around defining diseases according to their molecular characteristics. The populations get smaller and smaller, and it's just impossible to have sufficient numbers of patients to provide sufficient rigor and statistical robustness to come to a conclusion about whether a treatment works, treatment A works better than treatment B. So we do have to think of these novel clinical trial designs, implement registries and crowdsourcing approaches to understand how new approaches through patient selection can yield therapeutic outcomes which are pretty unequivocally positive. It's not marginal. These are not very incremental advances in patient survival or quality of life, but we're actually seeing fundamental changes in patient survival in terms of months and years and decades that we haven't seen in the past. And I think we can probably use these adaptive trial designs and these novel trial designs to identify the treatments that can provide those kinds of benefits.
Sure. And so what we're talking about here obviously changes the way patients are involved with the entire process. So what kind of, do there need to be incentives to have patients participating in this? What will bring patients into the door on this, specifically related to data collection and the use of data?
I think that's the real opportunity, and I think if you've got to figure out, the way we think about this is that, personalized medicine isn't so much a destination as it is a process, right? So, and there's lots of examples of being able to, achieve scalable customization, right? So you can, customize your milkshake, you can customize your phone. There's all sorts of ways to customize service, and we know how to do that. Probably need to look to some of those other service industries that have been able to achieve that level of customization at a scalable level and look at the processes they've created to do that and the customer feedback they've created to do that. So I think we have to look at how do we create a process and embed that into the delivery system and the payment system to actually deliver personalized medicine, not in some erratic, all-you-can-eat buffet way, but in a more, as the name suggests, in a more precise way. So you as a patient would be you'd be actively engaged to the extent that you want to be. We don't need to require every patient to be a doctor or a nurse to be able to understand their own care experience, but you can create tools and processes that allow patients to engage in a much more customized and individualized shared decision-making process that allows the best evidence to be brought to bear in their treatment decision that is as personalized as it possibly can be to them, and then they work with their care team to determine what's the best path for me. And in that process, I think, you have opportunities to share data and make your data from that experience part of the adaptive learning. So I think patients inherently, for the most part, want to be, one of their main value propositions in their care is wanting to be respected and have their voice heard in the treatment decision process. So there's already an inclination on the part of patients, particularly here in the US, where we have a very consumer-driven environment, so we can tap into that. I think patients would be willing to engage in this adaptive learning environment, but you have to help them understand what's the clinical trial enrollment is kind of based on that idea of you're getting the best care, but you're also giving an opportunity to sort of give back to the community and to the scientific process. So I think if you position that in the same way, that you'll get buy-in from the patients. I think they just need to understand what the value is to them to get the most personalized treatment, but how that opportunity could be used to better inform what are the right treatments for other people on a precision basis. Think of it as the democratization of healthcare, democratization of data, democratization of clinical trials, democratization of reimbursement. I mean, this is a potentially radical shift. That's why I'm not as optimistic about how long this is going to take, because trying to rethink the reimbursement paradigm in this model and create those processes, I think it's going to take some time to get that right.
We've had two cultural shifts, and the first one happened a couple of decades ago when, for the first time, health information was available to every single one of us on the internet. And at about that same time in our cultural history, we had new health insurance design plans, large deductibles, and then it put the onus of healthcare on the individual. Those two things happen at the same time. And since then, there have been many other shifts in personal ownership of healthcare. And it's been part of our cultural discussion for about 20 years now. And then add that to the more recent revolution in people thinking about participating and understanding what genomics means to them. The PMI aims to attract 1 million patient participants in the normal cohort or more. More than 1 million people have already voluntarily been part of genomic-based enterprises already. Sometimes it's ancestry, sometimes it's health information, sometimes it's through clinical trials or an EMR-designed trial. But there has been those two shifts, and I think we're ready for it. And I think patients are more and more experienced with personalized approaches to care through their own experience, but oftentimes through a loved one. And when they see that targeted approach to care, they kind of want it and kind of expect it and are curious why the rest of healthcare doesn't follow that track.
Steve, I want to get your perspective on this and how you see companies as embracing this shift, and especially about the expectations of patients.
Well, companies have clearly embraced the shift. I mean, not only in terms of the way that we're looking at clinical trials, implementation of clinical trials more into the community practice setting, not just the academic medical centers, and ensuring that they're equal partners in the process of investigation while delivering optimal care. Personalized Medicine Coalition, I know, has published numbers in terms of the enhanced investment of the pharmaceutical industry and the focus on precision medicines and development of precision medicines and biomarkers and diagnostics that go hand in hand with those. At our company, for example, 26% of our pipeline has very clear, defined, integrated biomarker development plans as a part of the drug development strategy. 64% of our pipeline has more exploratory discovery biomarker work that's trying to identify the appropriate patients that would be best suited and more likely to respond to specific medicines in terms of how we develop the medicines, not as a one treatment for everyone, but really identifying the patients who would most benefit or the patients who would have the least likelihood of having side effects from that therapy. So that's on how we're shifting our focus. I also think back to the patient engagement, in addition to what's already been said, I go back to the physician education, the physician incentivization and commitment to also partnering in this process of investigation, advancing these new approaches to patient care, and how it often, and in virtually all cases, really is another way of optimizing patient care while we're learning along the way.
Sure. So as we talk about this movement and we talk about the advances going forward, it's not without its critics. There are people who are more skeptical. I want you all to address what you say to people who don't believe that this is maybe the best approach, or it's going too fast, or they have concerns with this. So first, what concerns have you been hearing? Have you been responding, and what response do you have?
Yeah, so I think our organization on an everyday basis helps hundreds of patients with access and affordability issues related to their diagnosis of care. And so we look at this from an access perspective, and if you have this incredible science and this incredible opportunity to individualize and personalize care, it's all going to be for naught if patients can't get access to it, and that requires reimbursement to be able to make that happen. On the flip side of that, I don't say it's a critic perspective. I think it's just a practical perspective. Well, how are you going to pay for it? It's the other side of this. And so precision medicine, in some ways, sounds like a very expensive proposition. And some of the cases that we've seen have suggested that when these first come out, they are expensive medicines. But the idea is it's actually, in the long term, a more efficient and effective way of treating a patient. So if you can give them an opportunity to engage in a treatment protocol that they're going to get a higher response for, or that's going to be more reflective of the value that patient wants to see in their treatment journey, that's a better use of money than putting them on a standard therapy that may or may not get them the response or effect that they're looking for, and you're still paying for it. So the idea is this should be properly applied and created. This should be a more cost-effective model of treating a patient if you're actually delivering them the treatment option that's going to give them the best opportunity for a response to therapy, and whether they want efficacy or safety, or some combination of both. But I think that's the trick, is how do you create that, how do you rethink this and actually create a model to allow that to happen? Because as I referenced earlier, a lot of the conversation right now around payment models is around population-based payment models and standardization of care, which are, that is a good strategy for cost containment in some ways, but it also in some ways inherently conflicts with the idea of precision medicine. So I don't have an answer to that tension, but if we don't answer it now and try to figure out how do you create standardized customization, which again, that's the idea of scalable customization, it's going to happen more slowly, I think, than it should. So that's my concern. I don't have an answer to it, but that's kind of the tension between, well, how are you going to set up, how are you really going to pay for a precision medicine model?
So you're working on an answer to that.
I don't have an
We'll
answer
come
to
back
it
with
other
you.
than it should be more cost effective in the long run for patients and for the system if you deliver the most appropriate treatment at the right time, instead of wasting money on treatments that aren't going to be the most effective for that patient.
So how important is the investment now to get to that point? If it's not made now, will it jeopardize the efforts in the long run? How important is it to do this now?
We have to remember that our system was built on a one-size-fits-all model. And when we're talking about personalized medicines, we're talking about looking at the entire system of care. So instead of looking at the cost of a diagnostic, the cost of a therapeutic, and the cost of a hospitalization, we need to look at all of them at the same time. And we also need to remember that when we're looking at personalized therapeutics, they go to only people who will respond to them, which is a very different paradigm. And so we do need to make that point, and we also need to recognize that we're changing the healthcare system completely. And we're at the very beginning of that change, and it will require a lot of work. But when we think about therapeutics companies investing in new targeted therapeutics, we do also have to remember the flip side, which is that diagnostic used to choose the therapeutic. And there aren't that many incentives for developing novel therapeutics. It's a challenged industry, and we do need to figure it out.
So what
So
are
I was just going to add, and with respect to this challenge, I have to come back to the patient and look at the individual patients I'm aware of that have participated in our studies, and also look at the data of the increasing proportion of patients who are alive today and living very normal lives, return to family and to their jobs that otherwise would not be here today, and maybe imposing additional costs of end-of-life care, healthcare burdens and other costs because of the increasing morbidity from their disease. These advances have really had an impact at the patient level, and I think we really have to keep that foremost in terms of looking at how we're going to provide that to patients in the future.
And what do you think can be done either by the government or by outside groups to make your investments, to make companies' investments the most worthwhile? What can be done to further that commitment, to make it the most effective as possible?
Well, I think I've already spoken to it in terms of really just enhancing, reducing the bureaucracy, first of all, and in terms of making sure that we have systems that are modernized and fit with the technology and fit with today's scientific questions and scientific advances and how to further those. And again, the funding for basic research is vitally important, to industry as well. That's where many of the discoveries are made, and how we can incorporate that information into these advances. And also creating opportunities for this enhanced public-private collaboration to address some of these challenges.
So as we wrap up and we start to close this up, what do you all think of 10 years from now? What's your outlook? Obviously, we wouldn't be having the same conversation then. Do you think we'll have the same challenges? Do you think we'll have new things that we haven't anticipated coming up? hard to predict, but
I think we've seen a lot of innovation from companies and regulators around new therapeutics. So, for example, Liz Mansfield was talking about how FDA is looking at next generation sequencing. And I think they're using, I don't want to speak for the agency, but I think they're using this as a use case for new technologies. So I think we're going to see a very nimble regulatory agency in the near future. We're seeing nimbleness, and I think it will be system-wide quite soon. On the payment side, we have a lot of work to do, but again, when we see more and more patients demanding targeted treatments and not understanding the hesitation of getting those treatments to them, we're going to see an upswell, and I see that a little further out. And we have to do it because the pharmaceutical industry is science-based, and the science has already led us there.
Yeah, I would say this is sort of a nirvana moment for patients, right? So if you can actually create the system that allows a patient to go in and get highly customized, personalized treatment options that really speak to them and their value, their individual value framework on things like efficacy, safety, transportation, cost of living, all those factors. That is actually the thing that patients most appreciate, because there's nothing more personal than having a diagnosis, particularly of a disease like cancer or other life-threatening diseases or chronic diseases. So it's very personal to you. So this paradigm of personalized medicine naturally speaks to what, when you're sitting in that chair and you're hearing that, having that initial conversation of your diagnosis, to know that there is a paradigm around that actually helps assure that whatever options are going to be presented to you, you're going to be able to personalize those as best possible. Now that's obviously sort of blue sky, but I think that's the opportunity here. There is nothing more conducive to what patients actually are looking for in their treatment experience than this type of personalized journey, and knowing that their care and their options are going to be personalized to them. So how we get there, I don't know yet. We've talked a lot about the barriers and the opportunities, but that's, I think, the goal is to get to that level of personalization to patient, because that's what this means to the individual patient. It's so very personal.
sure. Do you have a 10-year outlook?
No, well, I wish I had that crystal ball, but I've been personally involved in drug development for 30 years, and I've never witnessed the transformational moment that we're seeing today, based on precision medicine, based on immunotherapy, and the advances that are being made. So I am an internal optimist that if we apply ourselves, if we're willing to take appropriate risks, if we're willing to make the right kinds of investments, that will continue to have this exponential improvement in healthcare through this kind of initiative.
All right, well, thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to our panel.
Thanks. Just to close it out, I want to thank Pharma for sponsoring this interesting event. I want to thank all the speakers for participating, thank the live audience, as well as those who watched on thehill.com. And for the full video will be available shortly on thehill.com. Have a great day. Thanks for coming.